so that we could start addressing those. So Stephanie and Brian, for your information, Steve had already sent over some comments, both from him and from city staff. But rather than having multiple versions circulating, we wanted to wait and collect everybody's comments so we could address them all at once. That also means that if there's any conflicts, we'll be able to catch them all at the same time. So
yeah, so we can, maybe we'll start with the, I see Diane's looked like she's joining, partially joining at the moment. We'll start with the design guidelines, and then Brian, are you able to pull the agenda up? We can do that for now, and then off the website. Unfortunately, I'm half technology enabled this evening, so.
So the first on the agenda was the zoning followed by design and then the draft report.
Yeah, that sounds good. We can go right down, but Brian will pull it up and then we'll go, there we go. Go right down, right off the order of the agenda.
There you go.
So first up is the design guidelines. At least that's the document that's up there first.
Okay.
And what was sent out was a clean version as well as a red line version that indicated the changes. So those are also dated at the bottom, so you can see what's new and what's been edited and added. I don't know if there's any comments on, if you want to just go through, if people have comments on the changes that were made, if those were a good summary of what we talked about previously.
I just had a few comments, questions based on what we talked about at the last meeting. Shall I just go through those?
Yeah, sure.
Let's see. Okay, so page 1, section 1.2. I see you added the landscaping and planting plan, but we had also talked about incorporation of some sort of green infrastructure and listing that out there as a goal.
Oh, you wanted that as a goal. Okay, yes. I'm sorry. I may have had it in a different section of my notes. Yep.
Perfect. And then jumping ahead to page 9, section 7. Back to awnings, my favorite topic. I like the changes, thank you. The only thing that still jumps out at me is this line about they may vary in color, in details, but basically they're limited to the store name now. So I was having a hard time imagining what those other details might be. And if that's superfluous, maybe we just take out that line.
So I think what we were thinking, let me just make sure I'm not, yeah, okay, you can all hear me. So in terms of how the awnings are built, that's part of it, you know, the different forms of the structure. And then also, do they have a valance? Is the valance scalloped? Is it, you know, is it pleated? Something like that. So there can be those subtle variations, but the idea is as long as they're in the same position on the building, they'll look a lot more uniform. And the idea is that we would get them, you typically, if you have a very traditional building, you'll see the sign band, then you have the awning, and the awning comes down partially over the doors and windows. That's where we'd like to see them, not sort of at all different heights and angles.
I mean, from my design taste, I would prefer they didn't vary beyond just the height, but I recognize that's my own taste. I'd be curious to know how other people feel.
It can be, I've seen it both ways. I've seen it where the landowner or the landlord has exerted a sort of control over all of the tenants in the building. So say it's one of those central doorways and you've got a store on one side and an office on the other. The landlord of that building has said, okay, you all have to have exactly the same awning. And then it changes perhaps when you get to the next building.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's certainly a possibility. I don't know, you know, that's something that could be put in here, is building by building. It has to be a consistent style.
And that's what I mean, building by building.
Yeah. So yeah.
But Brian, Diane, what do you think?
I think the standard size as height is key. The size of the awning is essential. Then I think there should be discretion. But maybe I'm not getting the point because I can't quite read this. Not to exceed 12 square feet.
I'm just talking about
So that's
the,
the signage, yeah.
yeah, if, you know, how like an awning, like Emily said, some might have a valance, some might be straight edge, you know, so right now they could be different colors, have different formats for the same building. I was just saying that my sensibility is that for the same building, that they are all uniform.
My taste was just a little bit of difference as they differentiate with their brand name or their image, as long as it's fundamentally the same broad facade, same height, same size. So I was with it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Stephanie.
No, like this is why we have multiple people.
But yeah, I thought if it was a contiguous, if you're talking about the building and it's a contiguous, you know, awning going across or individual ones, that there should be some consistency there. But I'm not sure if I've seen examples of where they might differ in whether there's, you know, a fringe or there's different colors. I'm not sure what it would look like on a single building.
So on a single building, it has to be consistent in size, profile, location, material, et cetera, et cetera. It's a multi-tenant building that's the issue. And so again, that thing of you have a storefront on either side of the door, right? You know, the doors going up to the second floor. And then on either side, you've got the store A and store B. The question is whether or not store A and store B can have different colors and different styles to each other.
Okay.
Newer landlords of larger multi-tenant buildings usually enforce that similarity, but an older building might not. And so, you know, obviously those would be grandfathered in now. Just simply changing the design guidelines is not going to mean that everybody comes into a conformance, but it's what you want going forward if they have to come back for any reason. And, you know, you could have that they are required to have the same style, but different colors, or you can have that they're required to have same style, same color, in addition to the same height. We don't normally just a point on an awning going all the way across the building. We tend to require that awnings, and you can see it in A there, is that you can't cover windows or crossover pilasters. You have to have them grouped sort of within each bay of window and storefront. That's important. You don't want to obscure those architectural details.
Emily, the point, as I said, maintaining their brand name. Now, a brand name to my mind is not only the name, it could be Fizzano's, but they're the best Italian restaurant in town or whatever. By that, I meant the brand image, which was just not a clear name. If you normally look at a shop window or something, at least indicates not only the name of the shop, but roughly what it is doing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering how that conflicts or how that can be supported.
So what you usually do on the awning is you just have the name of the store. What you're trying to avoid is where people have, in some places, put splattered logos all over the awning of not only the name of the store, but everything they sell as well. And here, what we're trying to do is just the name of the store. I suppose you could allow the logo of the store if it had one. But the idea is it's not supposed to be, say it's a convenience store, you know, you're not supposed to have Emily's convenience store selling Bud Light and Coca-Cola and this, that, and the other, all on the awning.
I was happy with Emily's convenience store. When I'm driving along at 60 miles an hour, I can see that it's a convenience store. That's the key thing.
Exactly. So.
Okay, let's see. I just had a question. Item, also page 9, I think. Item 8C8. It's in the new section about projecting signs.
Oh, yes. And I should say that one of the things that Steve and I talked to about, this needs to be if I got this right, Steve, it's been a while since I looked at the email, that this actually needs to be moved into the zoning rather than the design guidelines. We
Okay.
had a mix up on that.
Great. Yeah, I was going to say, it seemed misplaced there, but.
Yeah,
great.
exactly. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yes,
just,
yes.
okay.
Let's see, on the next page, item 5. We talked about this a little bit last time, and frankly, I'm not sure how we address it, but in item 5A about trees, existing trees, and the line that they shall be preserved to the extent possible. That kind of language always makes me nervous because it's so easy to say, oh, well, the extent possible is to keep 1 out of the 30 that are here now. So I don't know if there's any typical way to address that. Obviously, sometimes you have to tear down trees, but I would like to either have replacement or for the greenscape to be as plentiful as possible.
So there's a couple of things you could do. If it's the concern is about the health of the tree, you could have them, you could have a requirement that a certified arborist look at that. If it's about the location, say they can't fit it in, then you could have a requirement that any trees removed be replaced at a particular caliper size. I have been badly scarred by having imprecise language around trees and being on the planning board dealing with it. So I understand exactly where you're coming from. So,
yeah, and I'm thinking of the latter example.
Yeah. Exactly. And so to the extent possible could be further defined more specifically as health of tree or location of tree and the options for both. And we can do that. So.
That sounds good. Because I'm with Stephanie on that one.
Yeah.
And my last point, I don't think we actually talked about it last time, which was my fault. I forgot to bring it up. On page 13, section 3.2, we talked about it a little bit. Let's see. So, we start out basically saying you need to meet these design principles, but if you don't, the commission can accept an alternative in terms of the public purpose. Somehow that language strikes me as too loose and too big of a loophole. And I wondered, even though we have the clarifying paragraph right under that, I wonder if we couldn't just get rid of the second part of that sentence and just say, but does not meet the requirements, a compliance alternative must accomplish. I think that gives a little more substance and teeth to it.
Okay, so
do you see what I'm saying? Sorry. So if you kept, if the village district consultant and the applicant jointly agree that a proposed design meets the intent of section 2.1 design principles, but does not meet the requirements of section 2.2 design guidelines, a compliance alternative must accomplish. You see what I'm saying? By taking out the rest of that sentence, it sort of emphasizes.
So, and I'm sorry, because the paragraph spans 2 pages and I can't see the rest of the second page.
In fact, I'm looking at the old copy. Let me go to the.
Let me pull it up on my phone screen as well.
You've got the second page now.
There we go. Yeah. So let me talk through the process first, and then let's see how it could be better worded. So the key to this is that an applicant can't come in and say, can't meet the guidelines, so here's my alternative, you have to approve it. That's not what this states. It also doesn't allow the commission to come in and say, you know what, we don't like what you've offered, so you're going to have to accept this alternative, right? It means that they have to agree jointly that this is better. But we didn't want to just put out there that you being the city and the applicant can't just come up with some sort of alternative out of the blue. So that's where it has to go back to the design principles. Is this consistent with the design principles that were established by these design guidelines? And do both entities agree, okay, in that case, you can do this alternative. And that's sort of what all of that bump around it, all that extra wording is. The applicant also has to show that they can't meet the design guideline, that they can't, yeah. So
I like all that extra wording. It's the
Mhm.
wording that says it meets the public purpose.
okay, all right.
So everything following 2.2 design guidelines to
Okay.
me feels much looser than the following paragraph. So I would rather eliminate that.
Got it. Okay. So what you would say,
because it's more than just the public purpose. It's actually all those things you outline in the next paragraph.
so then we would end it, so we'd say, do not meet the requirements of section 2.2 design guidelines. The commission may accept the proposed design, something like under the following circumstances, and then the next paragraph. Beautiful. I love it.
Can you tell I'm always looking for loopholes?
Yes. Good for you.
Are you a lawyer, Stephanie?
No, but I used to want to be. So you
That's
get to witness the.
Oh, good point.
Okay. Excellent. We'll make that change.
And that was it.
Great.
Who's next?
Floor is yours, Diane.
Well, I
Okay.
must admit, I went through this and felt very much with the spirit of it and the detail until Stephanie picks up some of the detail, and then I realize I missed one or two things, but I'm happy.
And I'll say I'll ditto Stephanie's review, because she did a very thorough review on this, and she's looking for the same closet lawyer wannabe things that I tend to sniff out there to protect everybody. I had a couple of overriding concerns with the principle of having a design district. One of it is in, and I can't find the page that it's on, but one of the pieces in here suggests that if the consultant comes back and doesn't approve of or recommend a particular plan, that it can still be approved by a certain percentage. I think it was a 2/3 vote of the approving agency. Is that correct?
You're looking at the design guidelines themselves or the underlying legislation?
The guidelines, in the guidelines themselves.
Okay.
I think it's in my other copy of this. I actually had it circled there, but
Right.
I don't know if Steve knows or not. There's a stipulation in there that says that it can still be approved by a certain percentage vote. And I was just looking for that again. I'm not finding it. I don't think it came out.
I don't recall deleting it, but I'd like to see the rest of the language around it. It's probably up towards the top.
All right. And while we're looking for it, I seem to remember that it was a 2/3 vote versus a unanimous vote, which I thought was more reasonable, because if we're going through the trouble of having a consultant do the peer reviews, and we've called upon somebody who is to represent the interests of the city and the community, I'm not sure there'd be an instance where, where they would recommend against approving it and then have our zoning commission say, well, we're going to do it anyway.
I just found it. It's not in the design doc. It's in
Okay.
it's in the other, there's the actual zoning.
Okay. So if it's in the
does that
actual
mean
zone,
then that there's no control over that within this document is overriding?
no, so this document would, the zoning points to this document for the design guidelines portion of it, for the design review, but it's your zoning ordinance that governs the standards under which this is, or the process under which the design guidelines are applied.
Okay, so in those guidelines, we can't say with the exception of the East Norwalk Design District.
Usually those requirements for the number of votes, 2/3 majority, unanimous, those are usually set in the state guidelines, the state law rather.
Okay.
So I'd have to, again, I'd have to see it and then I'd have to trace it all the way back to be able to answer you definitively. But certainly that's the usual process.
All right, now let Steve and staff know as well that we did not do as thorough a review on the design guidelines as we did on the zoning. So Ian and A may still come back with some other comments, but I have a couple of more things I want to point out. And I apologize because the copy I have does not have numbered pages. So
that's the older copy. The one on the page on the screen is the red line that was sent out on Friday.
right, I'm using the red line one, and I don't know why. Maybe it's something that I have set up in my computer, but it didn't print with page numbers on it.
Got it.
I can give you this section is it is let's see here. It's a section on lighting. I'm looking to see where that actually starts. 2.2. It's 2.2.5.
Yep.
Okay, and the I think it's the last one of the last points there. It's item 2C as in cat. The flood and area lighting are strongly discouraged. So we're except there is something that would be unobtrusive or something from a safety point of view, why wouldn't it be prohibited altogether? Where are we talking about a location that could have flood and area lighting that we wouldn't want to prohibit?
Sorry, which line, Diane? 2.2.5.
Yep, and then it's 2C as in cat.
Well, the
Should be the
reason you
last
don't
bullet point on
prohibit
that
it
one,
is
yeah.
if it's
Please.
needed for a safety provision.
If we're not defining it as specific to the location, like a parking lot or an alleyway or a walkway, I wasn't clear on why it wouldn't be prohibited to begin with then.
Do you want to completely prohibit flood and area lighting? Are there
Well, I
situations?
would, except if that means that someone couldn't have flood and safety lighting, say in a parking lot or a walkway. I mean, that wouldn't be the intent, but I wouldn't want any flood or area lighting that could be, kind of within the public domain or something that might interfere with a residential aspect.
So that's covered by 1A glare. So lighting shall not cast glare onto streets, public ways, the sky, or onto adjacent properties. So they may need flood lighting or they may need area lighting if they can prove that they need it for a particular reason, but it still can't produce
but
the
it still
glare
can't cast.
or the
Okay.
oversight. Yeah.
And then is there ever anything in the guidelines that would suggest that there's timing on lights? So let's say at the time that the businesses traditionally close, if you have active use on the ground floor and they all close by, 10 p.m. or something, depending on the use.
I haven't seen that in the design guidelines. I've seen it.
That's more of a zoning thing.
Yeah, exactly. I have seen it in zoning, or I've seen it proposed for zoning. I haven't necessarily seen it passed for zoning. Two different things.
And hang on one second. I'm just trying to find the other page that did get marked up. Hang on. I'm not sure if it's in here or in the zoning statute where it talks about the hiring of a licensed architect or a landscape architect or a planner. Is that in the zoning regs or is it in here?
That's in the village district. That's part of the statute. I think we covered this at the last meeting.
Okay, so nothing to do with design then. Okay, and on page, again, sorry, I don't have page numbers here. It's in the very beginning under section 1.
Yeah,
1.2 in the peer review. Oh,
yes.
here it is, 1.2 in the peer review.
Yep,
Okay, so it says it shall hire a village district consultant. And so couldn't that be plural though? So in the case of a specific application, it could be an architect and a landscape architect, depending on the scope of the project?
it
Yeah,
could
I
Or
also
do you
be,
mean literally one consultant?
it could also
That's
be a
what you brought up
firm.
last time, Dee Dee.
Right, so
Yeah,
so we're talking
Yeah.
about a firm that they can assign multiple professionals to the review for any project.
yes, a
that what you're
village
talking about?
district
Okay.
consultant could be a person or a firm, yes.
Okay. And then in this I may have brought up last time too, but I don't recall in the last section of that, where it says, in addition to the report of the village consultant,
Yep,
that it may be submitted to others, including but not limited to the following. I wonder if we can, since ENNA is an actual organization, if we can add them there so that we're in there in terms of relevant review. Is that possible?
I'd
I
have
don't-
to, sorry, you
Do
go
you
ahead,
mean-
Steve.
Do you mean like for referral for your comment?
Right, the same way it would go to the historic commission or to.
No, that's a government agency. It's a government body. You can't,
Right,
that wouldn't be, I don't think that'd be legal or fair to the
Mhm.
applicant under any situation.
The historic,
noted,
okay.
noted agencies in there.
yeah, you know what, I see it's commission, and I was thinking more that it was also included like the Norwalk Preservation Trust and the Historical Society, which are not governmental bodies. Okay, that's fine, Steve. Okay. That's all I have on that, but we may have more comments later.
Anything else on the design guidelines?
So I had to mute myself. My own dog was barking. At every meeting I've been in Zoom for the last 3 weeks, there's been one dog barking in every meeting. Didn't want it to be my dog. So yeah, let's go to the jump to zoning and then we can hit the plan itself.
Great.
Right.
And again, this was, so Emily had put together a red line version and just a straight text. So if you wanted to use the red line. And what we forgot to put in last time was the amendment we went over about the I-1, which is the first page. That one, if you want to jump up, just scroll back up. There you go, Brian. That was the only other one, and there's been no changes to this one since it was first introduced. But we can start wherever people want to start. Go in alphabetical order, Brian.
No, I again was very comfortable. Haven't got that sort of legal brain and to deal with the detail. Looked good to me.
Diane.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself there. I have actually made a lot of comments on this and some changes, and I'm seeing that the copy that I printed is not showing who made these. I think Emily had the red lines and the comments in there. So now I'm going to go back and try to pick mine out. So just bear with me. When you're looking at it on the screen, it actually has the name in there. Okay, under section A, under item 4, I'm not quite sure what the right terminology would be, but we weren't really comfortable with something as strongly stated as provide additional residential development, even though I know that that's part of the goal, because meeting that criteria could mean almost anything. And so we thought maybe something like consider, and since the community is interested in having fewer apartment developments and more, we would suggest consider minimal additional residential development.
I don't like that. I like the text
Okay.
as it is. The text
Yeah.
as it is meets the TOD goals. I don't know what we're.
Sorry,
missing.
Steve, I didn't hear you say again.
I think the text is fine as it is. It's consistent with why the plan was put together. It's consistent with TOD. And I mean, it doesn't, those text below and the data below is what governs what's going to happen there, not the, the preamble.
Well, it's almost limitless when you take a look at this. If you're talking about the purpose of it is provide additional, then it doesn't really define the scope. It's too broad.
Well, additional could be one.
You could say, consider, appropriate incremental residential development. Something we'd feel more comfortable with that has terminology that limits it.
I think the terminology that limits it is the fact that it's within walking distance of the train station in the village area. That's the idea, is that you're
Yeah.
as part of
Even
the
that doesn't though,
goals of
Emily, because you could then concentrate it right there and still have excessive residential development.
but it still has to meet the zoning. So this purpose and intent is pulled directly from the plan, as Steve mentioned. So you need the zoning to be consistent with the plan.
All right, I'm not sure I'm understanding that.
Yeah,
So
I
if
see what you're
the
saying,
community,
Diane.
the residential community is interested in making sure that there's not overdevelopment. And we have a paragraph that says purpose and intent, and it says provide additional residential development. And it doesn't define the scope within that intent in that paragraph, then we wouldn't be comfortable with that. So I'm open to other suggestions for wording.
But Diane, and I don't mean to argue, but I just want to clarify, it's not saying provide additional residential development. It's full stop. It's saying provide it within walking distance of the train station, the village area.
Exactly.
That's the point, right? That's the point of what we're trying to do here, is to cluster those uses within walking distance. So you have that increased pedestrian friendly area. Without the development within that walking distance, you don't get that pedestrian friendly area. There's no incentive to provide
Emily,
that we talk about.
I'm not suggesting that there be no residential development, and we've counseled residents on the fact that that's part of the fundamental tenets of TOD. I'm suggesting that within that walking distance of the train station in the village area, which is quite large, by the way, that if we don't have some terminology in here that limits it, that we would be concerned.
I think
I don't think we can just take that off the table. It's that important.
I think we're spinning our wheels with this, because if the text down below and then the density proposed and those things in there, if we are or we aren't going to be on board with that, then whatever we put up above is not even relevant.
I mean, I do think optics matter. I see what Diane is saying. If I were reading this, it seems like the whole point is to develop residential development near the train station, and I'm not sure that's what we're saying.
What if you guys add something like where it says, provide additional residential development within walking distance of the train station in the village area that are within the criteria that we're using with the amenities and all that for the developments? So that, Diane, it's not going to be like they're going to put, 20 units because we're going to go according to the FAR, correct?
Right, well, that's within one development, but now you're talking about the entire walking distance of the train station in the village area, and each particular parcel that could rise to the level of the maximum residential units. That has always been the concern. This is nothing new, you guys. The community has looked at the plan in whole to say, and we've asked the question on many occasions, to say, we need to have an understanding that you guys, that the planners understand and Harriman understands, that the community could look at this and want to know whether it's feasible that it would ever happen at all or within our lifetime. that that portion of the community could actually be built out to the maximum allowable under the zoning guidelines.
To
And
me,
if we don't have limiting,
Anywhere in the city.
to
what's that,
me,
Steve?
sorry, I was gonna say, I think the word that jumps out to me is not to provide, but the additional.
I was going to say the
Because
same thing.
The
yes.
intent is to provide any residential development that happens to be within walking distance of the train station. And it's the additional that throws me off.
So why don't we just remove the word additional? It doesn't change what the zoning is doing. It doesn't change the plan. Provide
Right.
residential development, and then the criteria for that residential development is the whole rest of that zoning article that they have to meet in order to do it. Just remove additional.
Fine with me if we move this point on.
Yeah,
That works.
For
I mean, it's still,
wordsmanship,
I
you
would,
could
you know,
remove it,
obviously
but there's-
anything, taking the word out, I see where you guys are going with it, but the fact is that any residential development we're talking about here would be additional, so.
and I
you know,
think
we're not
that's
Not necessarily.
exactly what we want to encourage in relation to the TOD.
Right.
You need some
Brian,
economic development,
yeah.
and we're heavily constrained, as I see it, with the design guidelines and the zoning regulations on what theoretically could even be built, which is very limited in reality. That's my take on it. That's why I've been very happy with it as such.
Even if we put in something like provide incremental, here comes my cat now, provide incremental, I don't know, I don't have a thesaurus in front of me. Down, kitty. Okay.
But
I
do
mean,
think
I'm sorry,
Steve
like
is-
every time ENNA raises a point, we're just told, well, you can't have that. So I don't know how to continue this.
I mean, I think to Steve and Emily's point, to me, adding an adjective like incremental, we don't need to because it's already defined by the scope of what the zoning says we can and can't do. I thought what they were objecting to was sort of, I thought additional seemed to apply that we just want more housing at the exclusion of anything else.
Well, even if you added a simple word that said provide some residential development, even that would imply that it's, you know, could be limited in its scope.
But it wouldn't have more teeth than the actual zoning guidelines.
Steve,
Right.
are we open to public comment or no?
Not right now, no.
Okay.
All right,
I
why don't
mean,
we, can we agree to leave this as an open item? Because this is a critical point for the East Norwalk Neighborhood Association and the residents.
So you don't wanna
if we're gonna ultimately start arguing about what's down below, then fine, because I mean, if, to me, is if the idea of the way that the plan was structured was that the residential areas are really looking at two parts. It's the village district and also the additional residential in the I-1. There's no other new density proposed anywhere within that half-mile radius. So we're
Right.
looking at that geography only.
Right.
So if the group agrees with what's proposed down below, then whatever we say additional, we don't say additional, incremental, those words they have no weight at that point.
Well, Steve, do you happen to recall what the maximum build out was in the analysis that Harriman did for what the number of units would be?
My rough
within the-
notes
within
that are
the
in front of me
area we're
right
talking about?
now.
What's that?
My rough notes, can you guys hear me? Because I got a
Yeah.
message, my internet was unstable, so. But the rough notes that I got, and I can go back and check them, is if everything was built out in the village district itself, just that portion of it, it was 700 additional units.
Right. Including I1?
No, that's another 500.
Okay. So this is exactly what the point is that those numbers are objectionable to the community. And I think by leaving this paragraph here and not having some limit clearly defined elsewhere, that we can assume that whether it's feasible or not, Steve, that it is possible for that to happen. And in fact, I mean, it could happen.
Yes, it could
As in the
happen
1,200
anywhere in the
units would
city with
be,
any project and any density and any development. Sure.
Right.
I don't think anybody's ever said otherwise.
and that's not the intent of what the TOD is.
To build every unit possible? No, and I
Right.
don't think it says that anywhere in the plan.
Mhm.
That's
No,
the
the
same as
intent-
any of the zoning districts we have now that allow multifamily have the ability to build out to the maximum extent possible if they can physically do it. Anybody can do that in any zone right now.
Maybe you could provide incremental residential development that's consistent with the scope and size of the surrounding area.
But
And even that
incremental's a
wouldn't
word.
work.
I wouldn't use
Even that wouldn't work
incremental
because it could still
because
be
we can't
1,200
control when a
units.
project comes in and when a project doesn't come in. That would mean we can do 3 projects this year and 2 projects next year. It doesn't work that way.
So the intent of the zoning is to control the combination of the zoning and the design guidelines is what controls what happens in this area being the geographic boundary of the new village district area as proposed. And so this top bit, as you correctly identified earlier, this is a purpose. This is where we're saying, this is what we're trying to do. So it's that mix of services, it's an active pedestrian realm. It is residential development, and I'm perfectly comfortable taking out the word additional, but we do have to say that this allows residential development. Supporting job growth, minimizing land area for surface parking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of those. That sets out sort of the high level goals. And then second part is, and there's a design review that's part of it, right? That's section B that says we're going to have this design review that's part and parcel of how we're doing the zoning, and this is how it's going to work. Section C is these are the uses that are allowed. Section D is these are the special permit uses. So these are the ones that require that additional higher standard. And then we go into what those standards are. So what are the conditions? It's a lot of building requirements. What are the conditions under which you can build? So all of these pieces work together to govern what's going to happen. And that's the important bit.
I can only say that whether or not we change that paragraph is, we're going to also have a concern over the amount of density that we're looking to allow anyway. So when you get down to 1 unit for every, I think it's 825 square feet based on bonus for density and height, then that's where we start getting into numbers that are going to rapidly approach, the possibility of 1,200 units. So we can control it up top and then say that the standards below need to support what that goal is, or you can leave that goal there and have more restrictive guidelines in the review standards. Because honestly, Emily, the fact of the matter is that the review standards are, things are going to go back to the zoning commission. And if you have a city that has a mindset that it's going to be growth at all costs, then you're not going to have a plan that gets denied that the community would think is oversized for the community. That's just the way it is.
That's just your opinion. I think we should be noted as well.
So
That's my opinion.
I have a quick question for you though, is how did the ENNA feel about the idea of the walkable pedestrian environment, the additional trees, the seating, how, in terms of their goals for this area? Remember, I came in towards the end of this process where we were working on the design guidelines and the zoning. What did they want to see? What did the group that you're representing here want to see happen?
Those types of improvements within East Norwalk, we would want to see regardless of any TOD study or subsequent plan. So when you're talking about improved, pedestrian experience with, doesn't just relate to an active ground floor use. In our area, it actually relates more to the fact that we don't have decent sidewalks they're not maintained, they're not consistent, and they're not wide enough to be safe. So things like tree canopy are extremely important. But those are all types of things too, when we're looking at the infrastructure things, that a lot of it are controlled by the city and can already be dictated by our zoning commission by condition. And we do see developments that go up in the city that are otherwise considered objectionable or undesirable. But the zoning commission has at least stepped in and respected, the wishes of the residents, and laid in some fairly decent conditions on the development to go forward. Things like buffers and more restrictive things on lighting that they're allowed to do because the stuff is special permit.
Right, which is what
Major
these
concern
design,
here, Emily,
these guidelines set up.
is the fact of what this, people started out thinking that this was going to be a good idea to improve East Norwalk and to use a study that would enable us to see what was possible. A lot of people, including some of us who lobbied for this, didn't understand that the goal was to immediately turn it into a plan. So in taking a look at what was possible, people wanted to understand what could be done over here to maybe spur some desirable development, improve the area. And to be honest with you, we were trying to fend off what we thought maybe was the inevitable approach of the redevelopment agency, because our census tracking puts us right in the, the bullseye of someone designating blight and then coming in and doing all kinds of things that would be more objectionable. So I know you guys think that this is not, an important point here because it's somewhat controlled down below, but the level of density and height that we're about to talk to down below is not acceptable either. So I guess we can leave this point and go down below, and then I'll share the sentiment of the board. And I think you're going to see that the same sentiment is going to be in the public realm here once Steve, once Steve gives us the approval to post this and publish it.
Well, okay, so what, we're still on the zoning, I think. Are we gonna, what else do we want to go over with this? I mean, I think in broad terms, I think I'm kind of like to cut to the chase. Diane's I think she's gonna say she doesn't like the density and won't like the amenities tied to the densities. I want to know what everybody else thinks, because otherwise we'll just be kind of fumbling around in a circular conversation for another hour and a half.
As you know, and probably the committee knows, I feel very comfortable with what we're trying to do here. I think broadly what the zoning and the details of the design frame exactly what can happen. Limit it in terms of, yes, there is going to be more residential development. That will bring life to the center of East Norwalk. On the other hand, it's constrained by, even very crudely, 2-story, 2.5, 3.5 story. As you said, Steve, there's only certain areas where this can go on in. I feel very comfortable with the plan in broad and in most of its detail. Not quite as, so again, Diane's talking about principle. I buy the principle that where we're going with TOD and where we're going with this plan is right. And basically, we've got a lot of qualifiers in to make sure the development is consistent with East Norwalk and not, let's say, Waypoint or over in South Sono. But that's my take.
Yeah, I agree. I think having gone through this process, looking at what the existing zoning already allows and looking at what makes sense for anyone who would come in and develop any of these susceptible properties. I don't have an issue with the height and density. I do think it's unlikely that everything that could be changed would be changed in any length of time that would overpower the character of the neighborhood. The only open point for me are still the amenities. And Emily, thank you for making those changes. I still want to think about that a little more, and I think I still have time. I just want to make sure, I like the idea of the point system, but I just want to make sure I feel comfortable around it. So I reserve the right to come back.
I would add to, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is that at a certain point, these two, the zoning and the design guidelines, are attached to the plan as appendices, but they have to go through their own approval process, and they will change during that approval process. There's a whole public process that's associated with that, and they get captured as a moment in time in the appendix, but they will be changed before approval. So you still have plenty of time, Stephanie.
Yeah, the key thing with the especially with the, and I think we've stated this several times, with the point system and the amenities themselves, I want to be able to, and I think that's what Emily worked with RKG on, is do these actually make sense, and will somebody use them? I mean, I don't want to put something in that nobody uses, because or I don't want to have something so constrictive that they don't use it, and something too loose where they're just going to take advantage of it. So we want to just, before it gets to any approval stage,
right,
that still's got to be vetted more. And that can, the numbers in there, whether it's 10 points or 5 points or whatever the number is not super important right now, because that's part of the testing. And we can adjust that right up until the point the zoning commission approves it. So the process has to be the plan is approved. So the planning commission has to amend the POCD to reflect this plan. And then kind of concurrently with that, we'll start working on the zoning with that. So that way it's working its way through the system, and hopefully shortly after the plan is approved, the zoning would follow right behind it.
Steve, I'm sorry, I had a lot of technical difficulties today. I'm still at the office, so nothing worked. So first I couldn't talk, then no one could see me, but anyhow, I'm here. So I heard the past 20 minutes probably. So I just want to echo what Brian just said. I think that, we got to this point, but there was a lot of discussion, and we've been involved in this for about a year. So nothing on this is new. So I think that I'm also very comfortable of where we are now. My question also, did you guys had a chance to talk about the design guidelines? I don't know if I missed that in the beginning.
Yeah, we did. Yep.
Okay, sorry. So maybe
that's right. You can jump back in if you wanted to. That's fine.
So can I continue with the comments here, or?
Sure.
Okay. So right underneath that one, item number 5, support the retention of growth of jobs by supporting existing non-polluting industrial uses and allowing appropriate supporting uses. Steve, tell me if these are defined somewhere else, but I wasn't clear on the word appropriate and supporting. Are those defined somewhere else in a zoning regulation? Or is that just subjective, and it would be for whatever the zoning review is, or the district review?
So the uses would be, uses allowed in the zone would dictate what those are.
Okay, so allowable. So maybe that should be changed for allowable uses. And what does supporting mean?
Well, with any kind of industry, there's always, feeder businesses and businesses that provide and supply for those larger businesses.
That's the way I read it. I just want to make sure, because I didn't know how you were defining that, if there was some zoning regulation that defined it. In item 6, under parking, it was struck out the minimize land area for surface parking and established parking, and put in ensure residential parking requirements that ensure on-site parking needs are adequate. So the fear there in the community is that as we start to consider dropping the parking requirements, which are the trend now on the residential units, we still think that if you have 2 people in a household, you're probably still going to have 2 cars. And if you have a development that hasn't even provided for the number of cars there for their residential parking, then it's going to become a problem.
Can we put that as a
And the sentence was
separate
ensure
bullet?
residential parking requirements that ensure the on-site parking needs are adequate.
Can that be a separate bullet?
I think that should be a separate bullet. They're two different things. One is establishing the fact that you need adequate parking, which is what Diane just said. And the other is saying that's fine, but you can't, you can't just spread it out.
Right, okay, I'm okay if you separate it.
Okay.
That's fine. And then in item 7B as in boy, it says promotion of sustainable design. And I don't know if this was Emily's change or mine, because I can't tell anymore, but I put in the word require sustainable design.
I think that's
Is that against the
yours.
law, Steve, in terms of a condition or a zoning regulation?
I don't think we can require certain, I mean, I'd be worried that we're saying you have to do lead or something like that, when I don't think we have the ability to say you have to.
Well, they have,
For
they do have
something
to
that was-
manage rainwater because of the stormwater regulations that exist, correct?
Right, but I think you could, like, for nobody wanted to, they wanted to just build a one-story building for whatever reason. They didn't want to look at any density bonuses or anything like that. I don't think for that development, you could tell him he has to make a lead building or something like that. I think that's what that would imply.
All right, I think the bigger concern, I mean, it would be nice to have that. It'd be, maybe the concern is too, is the requirement for managing the rainwater, which could be, that's just stormwater runoff, which I think is regulated right now anyway, correct?
Yeah, that's looked at. DPW looks at that.
I'm sorry, Steve?
That's correct.
DPW.
We are the ones that we oversees that. There is no runoff from the building.
Right, through Public Works, okay.
Yeah, it is part of already the permit requirements.
In item B, as in boy 1, where the commission shall hire. Can you just refresh my memory now if that's coming out of the city funding because we're able to do that? Or is it the we hire and the applicant pays for?
We hire, applicant pays for it.
And that's defined elsewhere because it's not in the paragraph.
It's in the zoning regs.
Okay,
Exists.
so people have to go back and forth between this and the zoning reg for clarification then. Is there any way just to add that?
No, I don't want to put it in. It's already, peer review is already authorized in the zoning regs.
Is there anything that we could put in there so someone from the public who reads it understands that we're not paying for it? We meaning the taxpayers?
I don't want to put it in this text because that makes it clumsy. If the question comes up, we'll address it right then and there.
But what's the harm in just clarifying it?
I just don't think it's appropriate to put it in the zoning, this piece of the zoning text. It's already written into the zoning regulations.
I know, but mere mortals, Steve, don't go back and read zoning code.
But
I look at this stuff all the time. I have a hard time understanding it. And I think it's an important point here that we wouldn't want the public at large and taxpayers to have to go and search out something to see if it's covered in subsection 2 of some code that's hard to look up on the city website.
I'm just kind of confused on the why we would need to do it
Because you put the commission shall hire, and that kind of connotes that we'd be hiring and paying for it. I think it should be clear in here that we may be, getting their services, but we're not paying for it.
Well, maybe Emily, maybe we can just add pursuant to,
Right.
reference that section after shall hire.
Is it your site plan regs or it's the process regs?
I'll send it to you tomorrow.
Okay, great. We can do that.
And then for the review itself, it says to review the design of new construction and substantial rehabilitation. Just for clarification, can we say review the design of new construction, landscaping, hardscaping, and substantial rehabilitation? Again, so that mere mortal residents know the scope of what the review is without having to go back and read a regulation.
So the regulation is below. It's the Connecticut General Statute, Section 82-2J. It's in the next or the rest of that paragraph. I would need to double this. This was written to be consistent with the language of that statute. So I would need to go back and double check that statute before anything is added to it.
All right, so even modifying this sentence could,
I would have to double check the statute to make sure that, you know, we're not out of consistency with it.
okay. And just so that it's not limited there. In the next section, it should say, or maybe Emily made this one already, East Norwalk Village, TOD. I think that was
Yep.
yours.
We
Okay.
fixed that.
Okay. And I think you fix that everywhere. And just as a note, if you go back and do a find and fix, wherever you went in to fix city to be capitalized, everywhere you had the word capacity, city was capitalized in the sentence. So it just doesn't know that that's capacity.
Thanks for the catch, Diane.
Cap city. So, but it did what we told it to do, right? Which is nice. Okay. In section, Steve can answer this one too and tell me why it's in there, why it can come out. In uses permitted by site plan approval, section C, it's item 3C is in cat, manufacturing processes. Down right there at the bottom of the screen, if my screen is right. Only manufacturing, wait a minute, am I on the right thing here? The manufacturing principle process, manufacturing process.
Page 3.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, it's E as in Edward, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Yeah. The
Page 4 then,
manufacturing
top of
process
page
is
4.
principally artisan?
Yep.
Okay, and it said it shall not include mass production or assembly line operation and yada yada. Why wouldn't it include assembly line operation? I think there's lots of boutique manufacturing type things that could be considered an assembly line, and this would be restrictive. I was just curious, Steve, is that a legal term or something?
No, I think that's just consistent with the language elsewhere, the regulations about differentiating boutique manufacturing from what everybody kind of has this image of mass production manufacturing.
Right, yeah, but I think you could have something that's a small scale that literally is an assembly line facility that we would probably welcome, you know?
All right, we can take a lock at that.
Okay,
I'd second that from Diane as well.
thanks. Whoever that was. F is in Frank in that same section. In the last sentence, it says the truck traffic in excess of that typically occurring in the adjacent district or neighborhood. Can we say in the district so that it's all encompassing?
Well, I don't know if I would do that, because if you think about the trucks going in and out of the sewage treatment plant and the yards and everything else, I don't know if that's what you want.
Well, I'm thinking that would be within when you say adjacent district, typically occurring in the adjacent district, it could be, you know, the adjacent district could be Sono with 5 billion trucks a day. So I wasn't sure how you were defining adjacent district. And if
I
you
believe
would
it's the
comply, then
adjacent. I believe it's the adjacent zoning district, which would be the neighborhood district. Because this is now the village district. So if
okay,
this
so the
passes, it's
legal
village
district, not the
Right.
geographical. Okay.
Right. Exactly.
And then where it says all loading activity shall occur during daytime, just for clarifications, can that be all deliveries and loading activity? So there's not, you know, deliveries coming in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I would think that, yeah, I buy that one, Diane.
Thanks, Brian.
Good clarification. I know, so I have a beef with Steve a little about the daytime hours, which go from 5:30 in the morning to 9:30 at night in the middle of summer.
Yeah,
I think we should define those a little bit more carefully, as I said.
I do too. And I feel for the folks who live over by the oyster operation when I see those big tractor trailers coming through at 10 o'clock at night. That's just That's a real quality of life issue. They have a lot of quality of life issues over there, but that's just one of them. In section D as in David, special permit.
Diane, can I just go back to the daytime hours? I
Yeah.
do feel it's, I mean, I don't know what the commission feels or the oversight body feels, but I mean, unloading and delivering at 6:30 in the morning, at 9:30 at night, even this is a village area. It's not the middle of an industrial area, even though we have an industrial zone. I just feel that's just way too wide. It should be normal business hours defined.
Yeah, we usually refer back to the noise ordinance for those kind of things.
We refer back to what,
7
Steve? Sorry.
a.m. to 7 a.m. I don't have the noise ordinance, but I don't remember the stop time. But usually
it's
that's what
10.
we refer back to.
So can't we put in
I
whatever
have
those?
it right here. 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Saturday. Sunday, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. That's the ordinance.
Good.
But that's related to noise. So is it specific to deliveries or just a noisy delivery?
Steve, do you want me to put a reference to the noise ordinance in
Yeah,
there?
that's fine. That
Okay,
makes it back.
so during daytime hours only as defined by section, whatever.
They're
the noise
consistent with the
ordinance-
noise ordinance because that could change. Who knows?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. And I know some of it in zoning controls the stuff we love to call the beep, beep, beep syndrome with designs that encourage trucks to back up. And Emily's laughing because she knows what I'm talking about,
Yep.
right? It's maddening. It's maddening.
It's
In
an OSHA
section-
thing. I do think we can get rid of that.
What's that?
It is an OSHA request.
Right,
Request
right.
the truck. So unfortunately, that one we cannot.
Right. But there has been a couple instances, and Steve could probably recall them better than I can, where the zoning guys have actually worked with a property owner on their layout. So to mitigate how much the trucks have to back up versus coming in and then being able to do what they got to do and pull out straight. So that's definitely helpful. In section D in the special permits, item 1. It's in order to realize the goals, yada, yada. It's encourage a mix of retail and services to support the village feel the community desires. Again, I know we have all kinds of design things to protect us, but is there any way to make that word support any stronger? To ensure, to create, because yep, that's stronger. Are you okay with that, Steve?
Oh, I'm fine. Yep. I'll speak up if I'm not.
In section, wish these pages were numbered on mine. Still in special permits. Under item 4, brew pub and distilleries. We'd asked for this before. I'm not sure why it didn't get in there, where it says do not emit noxious odors. It should also be create excessive noise. And then I thought there should also be something in there about restricting disruptive outdoor events or excessive outdoor events. I know we tried to get this in there, Steve, when you passed the zoning reg that allows it in neighborhood business. Can we be more restrictive here?
What do you, I mean, I think you gotta be careful with how restrictive you're gonna be. I mean, if you have somebody that's got a brew pub and they have an outdoor seating area, can't they have, like any other restaurant, can't they function and do the same thing?
Well, I think the difference is, and I'm familiar with a number of these places versus restaurants. Restaurants tend to have clientele that come to eat and leave. And maybe once in a while they'll have a special event like, Cinco de Mayo or something yesterday. The brew pubs, I think, tend to have events and more, gatherings that they hold that are, corporate things or public things that tend to be larger and go on longer and maybe louder. But they're not
Well,
the
that-
type
they
of things
still
that
have to
require a permit or, you know, an event permit or police or anything.
Well, if they do stuff, I mean, they have to,
They would have to get a live entertainment permit through zoning, which has, you know, sound studies and comply with the sound ordinance and everything.
Right, but then that's only if they have the entertainment outside though, right? But if they had a corporate event that had no entertainment, they wouldn't have to have the permit, right?
Yeah.
I'm concerned about this. I was concerned when it went in the zoning, and I'm concerned about it here now that it relates to possible locations within East Norwalk.
well, it's only in the village district, so it's a pretty narrow band. It's an area where you allow all the restaurants right now anyway.
Okay,
Actually, with that, if the zoning map change goes through with this, there would be less areas where that could happen now than less areas that could happen in the future than could happen now.
oh really? Why is that?
Because there's areas proposed to be rezoned from NB to residential.
Okay. Like going up Winfield, you mean?
Yeah, and down, I don't have the map, so I'm drawing on a blank, but yeah, there's a couple of, not a lot of areas, but there's some.
All right. In section F, item F as in Frank, item number 6. With water dependent uses or principal water dependent use. Didn't we take this out last time?
We took out marinas. I think we missed this one.
We missed this one, yeah.
Yeah, we can remove this.
Yeah, that one should go with the other one.
So is this coming out then?
Yes.
Yeah, it should, because the other
And
ones
it's
came out.
It's in its entirety, correct?
Yes.
Okay. In section G as in good, item 3. I read that the second sentence, the last sentence there 5 times, and I'm not understanding what it's saying. Can somebody help me with it?
I think there's a map.
Did you look at the map below? Because it's
If
referring
you're
to
saying
the
that the street activation only applies to parcels on the west side of East Norwalk.
Oh,
East Avenue.
So
Oh,
that the west side of East Avenue, right?
it's the west side of
the
East
right-
Avenue.
Which is
There's
the
your
right
primary
aid
place.
side. But then you're saying north of St. John, so it's really one parcel. It's literally the parcel, that's the empty Howard Johnson's lot. That's north of St. John's and on the west side of East Avenue.
Yeah, we'll fix that sentence. I think I see you. Yeah, we'll fix it. We'll make the sentence
So,
match the
but
map.
why does it only apply to that parcel?
It's actually, I think it's 3 parcels if you look at the map.
Well, okay, but right, but why does it only apply to that property? Because on that same property, Steve is suggesting realigning the residential property lines behind it, so that it's a more uniform property, but I'm not sure that we want to go down that slippery slope. So I'm just, why is this thing getting special consideration?
I think, Emily, let's look at that sentence again. I think the wording is
Yeah, we'll look at the sentence. I'm looking at the map below, and I think the parcels on the other side may have not been susceptible to change, but we'll look at it and fix it.
I think the sentence is
I
just
think the
incorrect.
sentence is wrong. Yeah.
So there's nothing unique within these regulations to that parcel, correct?
No.
Nope.
Okay, so that's coming out essentially.
Well, it's just getting clarified.
We'll fix the sentence so it reads correctly.
Okay, wait, what would that be?
I don't know. We have to go and look at the map and the parcel. We have to go back and look at the sentence and make sure that what we were trying to do is appropriate and that we've got the right language there.
And what are you trying to do? That's what I'm not clear on.
We're trying to make sure that the street activation applies to appropriate parcels. I can't remember what's on the other side of the street to know why we didn't extend it up there. If you look on the map on the next page, you'll see there's the 3 parcels on the other side of the street. And we didn't extend the yellow line up there. And I honestly can't remember what was on those parcels. So we'll go back and have a look at it and see what we
Okay.
need to fix.
And if
there.
there's anything that's relative to street activation that's specific to that parcel, I think we need to revisit that.
It's not that parcel that's the concern. It's the parcels that the street activation was not applied to that I'm wondering about. So that's what we need to go back and look and then clarify that sentence.
Basically, what that sentence should say is that it applies to the west side. It doesn't apply to the east side.
Right.
And that stretch.
Oh, it applies to the east side of East Avenue?
No. Brian, can you zoom in again on the map of that little piece?
Yeah.
Oh, it's you, Emily? Thanks, sorry.
No, that wasn't me. Sorry, I had my own up.
Yeah, so in that area, excuse me, the street activation only applies to the west side. It doesn't apply to the east side.
Okay, so the west side of the parcel is the Rite Aid parcel and the former Howard Johnson parcel.
Right. Where the yellow line is.
Okay.
That's where it applies.
And I'm still not understanding why you're applying something special there about the 50%.
We're not.
We're not. See, everywhere that yellow line is where this applies. The exception is on the east side, and that's why.
Why don't you note the exception then?
Like we've said, we're going to go back and fix the sentence to make sure it's
Okay.
not.
And why is the east side the exception?
Because it's not, that area through there is not this, the makeup is different. There's not the need for the commercial. It just the way it lays out, it's a different transition over
there. I'll say okay, and again, it'll mean that I understand your words, but doesn't mean I necessarily agree with why that parcel should be exempted from it. We have the commercial building that's there now, that zoning by right, they could be a church, which it is now, but we also have the other building that's on the corner there that has commercial businesses within it right now.
I mean, if you wanted to add that in, we can, it's not, I don't have an objection.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that it's not there. And if it's something related to a future project or the state, we'd rather know that. Why would it be one side and not the other? Still the question.
We'll come back, Emily and I will look at it and we'll email out something.
Right.
Okay. Item 6. Let me see how far I jumped ahead here. Section G, item 6. Where it says the last sentence here, it says a streetscape design and public art that embraces the area's maritime culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we needed to add a sentence. Wait a minute, it is there now. Hang on a second. Okay, nope, never mind. That one was fixed. Is item 7 and 8 are there? Item 8, we were suggesting come out all together.
I thought we were just changing that piece about public realm.
Yes, we did. We took out the public realm. That was the change in there. I don't know why the red line didn't pick it up, but the change was to remove the public realm requirement, which we did.
In the red line, yeah.
But okay, so but this suggests that you could have the residential property there that has greater than 10 units, right? But not more than 40 units.
Right.
Okay. Which is, the community would consider that excessive and would want that to come out.
Now, what it's saying is that if you have between 10 and 40 units, you're exempt from the recreation area requirement, but you have to pay the in lieu fee. It's not restricting the number of units. It's just defining what happens at which level.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Hang on a second. I misread that, what my notes were on that. Right. Yeah, no, that's exactly the point. So why are they exempted?
Because the amount of recreation area that you would get for that isn't enough to basically be worthwhile.
So it would
So
be the
we're
equivalent
trying
of
to
what we call
avoid those tiny little
dog
strips of
runs.
land. Exactly. So the idea was, rather than requiring it, is that the in lieu fee goes to
Right.
the Downtown Public Spaces Fund, which will be used within the village district, providing a benefit.
But if you did require it, it just means that they'd have to have a development plan that accommodated it, right?
You'd
If you still
have,
required it, they would have to present a design to you that accommodated the recreation space.
but it's not very much space, is what we're saying.
But how do we know that?
Because you multiply the number of units times the required recreational area per unit gives you the amount of space that would be required.
Right. And then so we could restrict the number of units, so in order to ensure the space though, right?
I'm sorry, I missed
You're
that.
talking-
I apologize.
You're
No,
talking
this
about,
is-
I think you're looking at a completely different angle than we're looking at.
Yeah, this has nothing to do with restricting the number of units. It's merely saying that if you meet a certain number of units, this is the requirement that applies to you. Restrictions on units come through the other parts of this zoning.
Okay.
And the
So
dimensional standards.
A facility or development that comes in with 26 units would be exempt from having to provide the recreation and open space on site.
They would have to pay into the fund, that's
Okay.
correct.
And that's what I'm objecting to. So we can just note that in there somewhere. And then also with the fee in lieu of,
Yep.
it says, so
Can we
if we can
clarify
note that,
that,
just so that the comments of E and A are included somewhere, we appreciate that.
Diane, you didn't read that correctly.
I'm sorry?
That's not correct. It's not open space. It's just the recreation requirement.
Well, recreational, we can say that.
Oh, I'm
But the
sorry.
recreation requirement is something that is for the tenants only, so it wouldn't be a
Right.
public use anyway.
Nope, agree, right. Yep. Yeah, it's not in the public realm, but we would still want it to be as part of that development for the residents only.
Why would you?
In the
Why
same
would
way
anybody?
that we, the parcel, the development that went up next to Dunkin' Donuts, they had a requirement in there of the, I think there are 12 units. They would have had no, I mean, and maybe that's a dog run type of open space they have over there, recreational space. You can't even, I'm not even sure you can throw a Frisbee in there, but it's required to have it on there so that you have something, you know, where maybe somebody can go and sit, or children can go and, you know, put out a blanket or throw a ball or something on the parcel.
But that's what the open space and the public realm requirements are.
Right, and that's for, but I'm saying if you had something that's more than 10 units, they should be providing it on site as well for the residents.
So just to clarify, so if I come in with my 26 units that you mentioned earlier, I am exempt from providing the recreation area on site, but I have to take at the that price that's given there in the zoning, I have to give that money to the city so that the city can provide improvements or additional public space within the village district.
Right.
So the city, the village district is getting a direct public benefit from this fee in lieu
benefit
they would not otherwise have.
It might not be parks and open spaces or recreational space, because it's not necessarily the city's going to go out and acquire land or designate it for, you know, if you had every developer come in and want to do the pay in lieu of, there's not going to be, you know, enough of an opportunity for the city to acquire land to make up for what would have been on the parcel for those residential uses. I don't think we take it out at you know, and leave it in lieu of. I think those fees should be paid regardless as part of the special district for overall improvements for the, you know, the good of the community, and maybe the things that the city can't afford, but I think they need to provide it on their own. And if we did, the second part of this was, if you leave this in here and you still want to have a fee in lieu of, this literally reads to be paid to the Downtown Public Spaces Fund of the city. So I don't know if that's in capitals and that's actually a budget line, or what downtown you're talking about. And most funds go into the general fund in the city and then can be appropriated everywhere. So if it was in here, I'm also concerned about you know, how those funds get paid and where they go and how they get expended. But I would prefer it not be in here, and that at some point where we talk about a special services district, that the funding come from there for other things that might be incremental improvements or amenities or beautification, infrastructure improvements that we never have the money for.
That's what it's being defined as being used for. Design improvement of public parks and open spaces within the EVPZ. So I think we've got the location for its spend is right, isn't it, folks?
Yeah, it's for within the district.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm suggesting that any new development in the area would contribute to that regardless. And I'm saying that if it says that it's paid to the Downtown Public Spaces Fund, I don't know what that means. And if it says public parks and open spaces, well, it does say within there, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know about having the potential developer come and pay for the amenities, and they have to pay also for the upkeep. And then on top of that, ask them for another fee, which it'll be nice, obviously, because that'll help us maintain all the amenities that we have. But I don't see a developer doing that. I don't know.
So just to
But
back up,
Steve, from a budget
everybody
point
a
of
little
view,
bit
are these,
understanding of what this is. So if it's easier to envision this in a larger development. So a lot of the larger developments have like their own gyms in them, which
Yeah.
are really the size of like a commercial gym.
Mhm.
And if you're going to require that in a small development, you're really not getting any benefit out of it or any bang out of it. One of the other reasons to do this would be, instead of them putting in a very small gym for 26 units in the building, you would put maybe they would, on the ground floor, they would put a gym in that would be open to the public. So you have that street activation, your use, and and then the residents of the building still get the benefit of having the gym on the same premises. This way, they're not getting away from having to have some skin in the game. So they're paying this fee into the fund. And when the fund accumulates over time, the city uses that fund to fund a larger project.
Mhm.
I will say that I haven't often seen a residential area or recreational area requirement in other zoning. So that's not to say that I've seen every zoning in every town and community in all of New England. I don't want to make that claim, but this isn't something that I've seen in other communities. So, you know, you are trading here a private benefit for a public benefit. And to Judith's point earlier, there's only a certain amount that you can simply request that a developer do. You have to have a nexus. You have to have a point at which it makes sense for the developer to do something. So for you to say that we want this public benefit, there has to be a reason attached to it. In this case, the reason is that they're getting relief from the recreational area requirement by paying in lieu. If you said, we just want you to make a contribution to our fund for this, you would have to give them something in return. And then that's where you start talking about those amenity bonuses.
And then Steve, back to the financial question then, is this actually a line item and an accounting bucket within the city? So that the funds are kept separated, and how do they get, what's that?
I said, I believe so, but we can confirm.
So then there could be an accounting of the funds that come in, and then how do they get appropriated?
I don't know if anybody's.
You're right.
So I'll circle back.
Okay. In item H, D as in David, public art. I mean, E as in Edward. We have a lot of questions on having public art in here to begin with, but I'll leave that for now. But within the description, it says works of art which are on display. Is there any way to, hang on one second. are these meant to be permanent art displays, or can they be seasonal and or themed? And I'm thinking of the way that Stanford does it, Art in Public Places program, where once a year they have a themed art display where they commission artists, and then they have other things that are seasonal. There was something in here that I read that led me to believe that it's a permanent installation.
It's a permanent because it's attached to a special permit. That doesn't preclude anybody from doing a seasonal or a themed display at some point. But in order to be eligible for this particular amenity bonus, it would need to be permanent.
Okay, and that's scary because I don't want to start the mustard, the mustard line debate again on West Avenue, but hopefully this, anything that would be permanent would be well scrutinized. And I wanted to add in consultation with the Arts Commission, but to have
It's in there.
ENNA, but the Arts Commission is also a governmental agency now. It's a city commission, Steve?
Yep.
Okay. And then in item F, in the public parking, the second sentence that start these spaces that shall be located, right?
That can be shall, yep.
Okay. Of a parking garage or surface lot. I think that was already changed in there. And then we wanted to understand on everywhere that we talk about public parking facilities, the parking spaces that are designated for the general public, that they're well identified so that people know, but we're also talking about, there's no charge. Would these be parking that people have to pay for? Or where is that defined? Is a property owner allowed to charge for parking?
I would think so. That's the way it's done in a lot of other private developments and where they provide.
So we're saying you have to provide for the public parking, but that they can charge for it.
Yeah, I don't see why they couldn't.
You have to maintain it.
Yeah, and it's on private property too.
Okay, maybe that goes into the amenities list then, that say that that's an amenity to have free public parking because, they're getting a lot of density and height for everything. Okay, and then you, I think you already know, Steve, that you're a mind reader, that we object to the point system.
In concept or in?
Yeah, tell me
number?
why.
In concept, we're okay because it kind of levels the field, but I think the points are excessive and it's too easily attained to have the maximum height and density. By the way, at the board meeting, it was interesting because the majority of the board members were okay with 3 stories, and a couple were okay with 3.5 stories, but not in conjunction with the amenities and how easy it was to get the, I think it was 15 points at this last one to get there. And there's still a question, an outstanding question about being able to go back and revisit these amenities, especially things like fountains and water features. In hindsight, when the public was together and they were at workshops and we have our ENNA meetings, I think people were describing things that would be nice to have, but they hadn't correlated that thought with those things becoming the trade-off for density and height. And so we've said for the past few meetings that the community is more apt to then look at it and say, oh, well, in that case, we didn't really want the, fill in the blank. That's not really important to us if it means that equates to the points that gets the height and density.
Can you?
And we're not prepared to, we didn't come up with a list of what might be appropriate points. And we were kind of looking for you guys. And I explained to the board last night that the past few times we've raised this issue, it's just been that Steve and Harriman have pointed back to us to say, well, then you come up with the list of what you want. And we've been struggling to do that. It's one of these things where it's been easier for people to articulate what they don't want than for them to say, this is what we'd rather have. But it's things like the neighborhood grocer, it's things like tree canopy, you know, those types of things that were more important. Even if you look at something like, you know, talking about the building drainage and integrated rain gardens, a lot of that stuff we take for granted should be a part of, that's like a non-starter, you know? Those things are the price of entry. You talk about farmers markets, you know, we've said before, we could have farmers markets every Saturday in East Norwalk at churches and public properties. And
so the first amenity on there, if you scroll back up, if you don't mind doing that, that's designed to get the ground floor use, active public ground floor use. I did reduce the number of points on that so that it would be harder to get. Also, I figured almost nobody's going to give a 50% discount on their monthly rent, which is what would have gotten you the maximum points. So now you get the maximum number of 6 points, which would be equivalent to a 30% reduction in annual market rate rent. That's designed to help encourage a developer to do something like a grocery that otherwise might not be feasible from a market basis, because they would be able to reduce the rent. It could apply to any of the other active ground floor uses that would otherwise be difficult to get given current, and I say current because current, right? We're just talking about now,
right,
as opposed to the future current demand. Demand may change in the future, and that particular amenity might not be required or achievable because there's no reason to reduce the rents. So
well,
I did change the points on that. The others are a little trickier to get.
Well, let's just stop on that one for a second, Emily, because I can tell you what the feedback was on that.
Sure.
It was really three things. One was that the active public ground use is required anyway. So we're gonna look at a parcel and we're gonna say that for the residential above it and the mixed use, you have to have an active ground floor use.
That's correct.
It's in the developer's best interest to be at the table to attract the tenants that are going to succeed and be long-term tenants in that market. So it's beneficial to them to have a pricing structure that might attract something that they think is beneficial to the community, but it wouldn't be a give up for us to say, now you can have even more units and more height in order to do it.
So
Emily, I think maybe the title of that amenity just changed, because I think it implies that if you do the ground floor use, you're eligible, even though you're already required to, that you're eligible for points, maybe, but it's really related to the rent reduction.
Yeah, maybe. I think you're right.
Right, and we just don't see the value in that, because if you let's face it, if you own a property, I'd be suggesting that the owner of that property is going to want to have viable, successful, long-term tenants there. And in order to attract them, they may have to, on their own, reduce a certain percentage from the market rate in order to be able to do that. There's a trade-off. Do you want to get $3,000 a month rent and, and turn over every 5 years, or do you want to get $2,000 a month rent and have a 20-year, potential 20-year tenant there?
I actually completely agree with you on that, Diane, but I have also seen landlords who have been content to leave a space empty rather than to establish a market rate that is less than what they want.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to say I completely disagree. Maybe I lived in New York City too long.
I have also seen, wait for a sec. I have also seen, and this was a case that a colleague of mine worked on, where a grocery store bought another specifically excellent grocery store. No problem, great location, all of that. They kept that grocery store empty because they didn't want their competitor buying that grocery store and moving into their market, because they had their own grocery store, within that same market area. So while I agree with you that the logical thing would be to accept $2,000 a month rather than $0 a month, landlords don't always operate that way.
Okay. And
So
I
what we
appreciate,
want-
I appreciate you saying that, because we have some of that going on in East Norwalk right now for sure, with little tiny storefronts and some big parcels right now. However, that is not the concern of the community to trade off and you know, fit into a landowner's business model and tax write-offs by trading off density and height for that. So
then
you
may
can
just
change the
end up with-
title of it, but the fact is that they're still looking to get a certain number of points in to get towards the additional height, and it's not important to us for that.
Okay.
That's
You
it.
just
That's
may
it.
risk having empty ground floors.
That's a
all.
business model. The lead eligibility, there was a lot of debate on that. The thing is that the conclusion we came to is that most people found it desirable. But we also felt that this is something that the zoning commission can control in terms of encouraging applicants to do it. And it's also in their best interest to do it, it's going to be easier for them to rent. It's going to be less costly for them to operate in the long run. And it could also be, you know, if it's something that requires conditions, it could also be conditioned. So it's important, but we're not sure if it was important enough to trade off points, and certainly 6 points for the density and height.
So remember, just it's not 6 points for one or the other. It's 3 points each for a maximum of 6.
Right.
And again, it's the same thing as we talked about with the others. You can't require this unless you're going to give something back in return.
Right.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, I was going to say the zoning commission wouldn't be able.
Yeah, you can in the same way that we require things nowadays with conditions.
No, you can't. No. I think
Only
that's
if they come
wrong.
for a special permit.
Well, even a regular application can have conditions on it, right, Steve?
No, you can't just apply conditions willy-nilly like that. That's not how it works.
No, but you're not restricted from applying conditions on an application.
If on certain applications, yes, you are. If the site plan application, for example, you can't say you have to build to lead or something like that. And the special permit, you can't do that because the special permit criteria don't dictate that you do that. You can only require what's in the regulations. That's why this is in there the way it's there.
Yeah, I think it's you know, the sense was again it's a go out to the broader community, so you'll hear from them. But I think this was another thing where people thought, oh, that's it's a feel good thing. It's a nice thing. It's a nice to have, and maybe it's 1 point for each if it ends up still being a point system. You know, maybe it stays in there because people really want to encourage this outside of a builder wanting to do it on their own for their own benefit and for the benefit of their tenants.
I will say, and again, I'm not in agreement yet on the exact point structure, how many points people get, but I do think there is a sizable community who would also like to see this remain because they do think it's that important. Because there's no way to force builders to adhere to these standards otherwise.
Right. Well, these standards are mostly for the benefit of the builder and the tenants. And if you're not looking at the global universe of, you know, the whole universe, from the community point of view, it's a benefit to the building owner.
It's a benefit.
Well, it's supposed to be a benefit to the world, the entire community. But Emily's going to send over the list of requirements. So until I see that, I can't really speak to it.
And I wonder what the thoughts are of our, is Pam Parkington on with us?
I don't think so.
Okay. Just from the 3rd taxing district point of view of the, how they're balancing off, you know, conservation and lost revenue in the taxing district, but that's a discussion for another day. The indoor pedestrian seating and outdoor pedestrian plazas, because it says indoor pedestrian or outdoor pedestrian plaza. So it's a possibility of 13 points there.
So it's 1 point per 500 square feet. And we looked at a limit of 5,000 square feet. We were basing it on a maximum of 5,000 square feet. Plus you have to do 3 amenities, at least 3 amenities. You're welcome to do more for 1 point each. So that's how you get to 13. So if you provide 1,000 square feet, you're not going to get to 13. That's for a maximum of 5,000 square feet plus 3 amenities.
So if you had 3 amenities at 1 point each, you'd have 3, and then the rest of it is made up in the 10 points.
If
From the
depending on
per
how many
500
square feet. Depending on how many square feet. Yep.
All right. So, and you'd have to have 5,000 square feet of.
To get
And,
that full 10.
What's 5,000 square feet, Steve? I'm always looking for
Yeah.
examples.
That's a lot of the lot sizes down on, like, I bet you on Cove and all those streets, I bet you they're 5,000 square foot lots. It's pretty big.
Yeah. If you think of the average house size as just round numbers being 2,000 square feet, right? I think it's actually a little bit underneath that. It's 5,000 square feet it's a full plaza. So it would be really, really difficult to get 10 points on most of those lots.
Well, is it so prohibitive that they couldn't do it? I mean, is that then
No.
See,
this is the key. They would have to do some of the other benefits. So you'd have to have LEED silver plus a 2,000 square foot plaza, or with those 3 pieces, or they'd have to have public parking and 1,000 square foot plaza.
Could they have,
the rent control.
if we left this in here, could you have a maximum of the amenities below, like not to exceed? How many amenities are below? I forget in the 1 pointers.
2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you're worried that they'll mix and match amenities and have a smaller seating area. Don't forget they have to fit the amenities onto the seating area.
Right, but so if we had 8 amenities here, is it 8? Or 7? Pull it on my pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's 12?
Yep.
So if they pick one from all of those, they're at 12 points already. And one piece of one thing qualifies as having met the amenity. So they could have 1 water filler, 1 junction box, one public art piece, 1 piece of a green wall, some fountain doohickey, 1 bench that had power seating, et cetera, et cetera.
But remember that some of those have their own square footage requirements. So the fountain water feature has a square footage requirement. Powered seating obviously has a certain amount of land it takes out. The rain gardens, the community garden, all of those have minimum square footage requirements. But you are right. They could, we could put a limited number of points on there. If you're worried that somebody's going to stack amenities into a very small space, we could say no more than, minimum of 3, no more than.
Yeah, and even into not even a small space. I mean, really, the water filler and the Wi-Fi don't take up any space in a.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So maybe if this stays, again, I'm saying you guys, maybe you set it as a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 6 or something. So
I think that's fine.
Or the only other way you consider it is that you add point values to each of these.
Mm-hmm. I think a maximum
because some of these are more important to the community than others. Like we didn't get, it was fun in the meeting where people were talking about water fillers, but then in real life, whenever we're talking to people about it, not just the board, I mean the community, they're like, no, just take it out. Come on. So,
well, I think perhaps now, but maybe in the future you'll want them more.
Yeah. I was going to say until that hot day in July and they're
right. Yeah.
walking
exactly.
by.
And then, carry $2 and get a bottle of water. I know what you're saying. I mean, it's nice to have, but is it nice to 1 point
Who
that
buys
adds up
plastic?
to what we're looking at? Get rid of it. Make it a 1/4 of a point. Get a Poland Spring thing.
Plastic.
We had community gardens in here. I mean, what is the reality of something like that being on a development parcel that's mixed use with residential? And
you'd be surprised.
Okay, I probably would be. Do we have some examples or?
Well, we are trying to be creative, allow for some creativity in this area as well. But, community gardens have been an amenity. So
Okay, and all of these things are required to be on site, right? There's no exception where you say you can move it off site and still
No,
comply?
they're on site. Yeah.
Okay,
absolutely.
yep,
This
that
is
one
the
would be
point.
surprising. And then I thought the, are floor junction boxes really for the benefit of the building owner?
They're in case you want to do a public event on a plaza. It
Right,
means that if they're pre-installed, it's a lot easier to have that public event. You know, you could have a food truck come up and plug in and,
right.
you know, or a farmer's market. The junction boxes are there. We could consider requiring a minimum number to get the point. So, you know, they have to have
Okay.
at least two or whatever, but.
All right, because then we didn't know if it was something then, or, you know, any of these things would be, we'd be prohibiting the building owner for charging for any of these amenities, all right? That's the point of an amenity in the public realm, correct?
Right, the public amenity.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there couldn't be any fee for anything associated with an amenity.
No, the idea is they're not charging you to be part of the community garden, although, you know, they might end up having a wait list for it, but.
Right, but there wouldn't be a charge for it, or if there was a community event that they wanted to use the plaza, they wouldn't be charged for using, say, the junction box with the electricity or something, or a fee to,
I wasn't anticipating that, but you know, that
okay.
the developer may well protest, in which case that has a discussion at the planning level at that point, at the approval level rather at that point.
Emily, wouldn't that use fall into the landlord keeping up the amenities?
Yeah, I
Like
think
if,
you're probably right.
if they used the box, I mean, they're gonna use electric, but then again, if it was a water fountain or whatever else, they still have to pay electric, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Judith. It's part of the maintenance of it.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, Judith, because we still have in here that the installation and the maintenance in perpetuity is with the building owner. And it passes to subsequent building owners if it's sold, correct? Steve? Or somebody?
You're on mute, Steve. I think he said yes.
Okay. The reason why we talked about that last night at the board meeting is because in the document somewhere there's a paragraph that talks about community stewardship. And we didn't want things to be turned over to, like, you know, friends of the fill in the blank, and then some, you know, civic or social organization then may have good intentions to take care of something, but then they're either saddled with it or they abandon it. So any reference to stewardship would be outside of what the public realm amenities are, correct?
I think this stewardship was of the plan overall, not of individual components of development.
Okay. Just want to be
That's
clear
usually
on
how
that.
we use it how we refer to community stewardship.
All right, and so in the amenity calculations themselves, I'm kind of with Stephanie, like I've never really been comfortable with the number of points themselves, although I think point systems are less subjective than other methods. But under item 3, where you actually have the calculations, I was prepared to suggest that the first threshold to get to 2.5 stories, item A, would require 20 points. And we took out B altogether until we could compile a list of amenities that would be worthwhile to get to the 3.5 stories with the 825 square feet, the one residential unit per 825 square feet. The density and height combination there are beyond the threshold of what East Norwalkers want.
I'm sorry, beyond the threshold that ENNA wants, is that what you said?
Right. Well, the community, that's from the community.
That's from the people you
It's the
talk.
number one thing that the feedback is from the community, and some, we have extremes with it. Steve has probably heard from some of the people, like literally not one more apartment. And we've been managing those expectations as best we can. But the majority of people that we represent, that this threshold is too high.
Okay, duly noted.
and it's, especially coupled with what the numbers could be on a max out. We are still requesting too, by the way, Steve, just in kind of a housekeeping thing, as you're putting these plans together, Harriman or whoever's printing these things out, they're incredibly difficult to read. Producing them on dark color paper also makes things difficult to reproduce and be legible. The maps are not delineated well enough with the hash marks, and the legends are like zoomed in enough. So I can give you some of that offline.
Which document are you referring to now?
In the draft plan.
The plan itself.
Yeah, in the plan itself. And then even the, the layout of the design stuff, I think is going to be, maybe that can be prettied up a little bit, but, and then in the plan itself, there was a sense that there's a lot of filler pages in there. It's like, we have 100 pages, but maybe 20 of them could go, or they could be appendices, or there's a page in there that has the whole thing or a part of it blocked off for the Metro North Railroad fare schedule. Things like that don't need to
So
be
we
in there.
the YouTube feed is turning off at 7:30 for, I guess there must be another meeting who's going to trump us and take that over. So, but we can continue talking about anybody. I guess, Brian, can you confirm that if somebody wanted to listen in, they could just use the Zoom dial-in number, they could listen in still?
Yeah, the dial-in number and the Zoom link are still live, but the YouTube stream would have to kind of
Okay,
end.
so just for the people who, there are a few
But
people.
I'll
watching
tell you
it.
one thing, when I call in, that's where I have some of the problem, because I'm at the office and my work computer do not have a camera. So when I call in, I couldn't speak. So I don't know if there was an issue about talking.
And this meeting was scheduled to end. I have something else, but I can try to move it. Do we have a specific end time?
No, but the question is, I was really thought we would have been done onto the plan about an hour at least ago, and we're not, now it's 7:22. What is everybody's thoughts beyond that?
I think we should open to the public and use these last few minutes so they can participate.
Well, we got one attendee right now. There's
So,
nobody.
Jan, she did raise her hand earlier.
Yeah, so my vote would be to listen to the public, and then I think that it would be good to see what they want to say.
So I can allow her to talk.
I'd like to hear what anyone has to say.
That's fine. We have to, what do we want to do about actually, because Diane started talking about the plan a little bit, but I didn't hear from anybody else about the plan itself. One comment I had was I thought, and then Diane echoed some of it, that like some of the items, particularly with the community engagement and also with the transportation stuff, was already stated in the appendix. It could come out of the plan to kind of lighten the text a little bit.
Yes, and I said at the beginning, Steve, that we had received a number of comments from you and from city staff, and we were just waiting to get comments from the committee before addressing them all at once, but certainly tightening up those sections, received that information, and we'll be happy to do that.
Right.
I agree, we don't need to make it repetitive.
Yeah, I just think, from a readability point of view, I know it's put together pretty quick, but we can make some improvements where the legends aren't, in the right place, and things carry over to the next page that make it not easy to read. So
well, it's also, it's not going to be printed in that format. Diane, Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not the format, and that I use a different program, right? Or it'll be formatted differently at the end.
That's we should talk about that. That's that's InDesign is what it's in now, and then obviously we PDF'd it for you. But I think it was designed to be both web and print friendly. So we can talk about the printing format that you want, Steve.
Okay. But the final version will have, it'll be prettied up, I guess, is another way to look at it. Legends correct, and yeah. Is there big items on the Stephanie, if you're still there, or Brian, about the plan itself that we need to discuss?
Not from my perspective. As I said earlier, I feel very comfortable. I probably missed a lot of small points, but I feel very comfortable with it.
Yeah, I missed some of the early stage of the plan. My general comments were along the lines of what Diane just mentioned. I thought some of the maps were hard to see or decipher. Did not do my lawyerly level read, I confess. But like in general, it seemed fine. Nothing big jumped out at me, but I'll let you know if anything changes.
We did the lawyerly read and went through the whole document. So I have a lengthy document. I can do a couple of highlights just in the interest of time. I tried to get this over to Steve. I apologize. I am in a seasonal business, you guys, it is crazy. It's like 16-hour days right now. So I tried to get this over to Steve before the meeting started so he could at least email it out to folks, and I'll get it over when we end. But we kind of went through page by page, similar to the analysis that ENNA did back in December, if you remember that. So it was a really comprehensive review of the document, and some of the things that are in the plan, we're concerned about how they're being articulated to the community at large. And I don't know, I'm concerned about the timeline of this. If I say now that I get this over to Steve and he gets it out to the whole team for review, but he's also presenting to the planning committee tomorrow and, looking to, advance this, how much time do we have to really sink our teeth into this still?
Well, based on Ryan and Stephanie's comments, does it make sense to have another abbreviated meeting, maybe max it at 2 hours, to just discuss the plan itself in 2 weeks?
Can we do that can we do that like next week, or is that? I'm always looking for more time, but
find a date. I've got a meeting Monday night, Tuesday night, and I think maybe even Thursday night. I have at least 2 or 3 meetings already next week. So if we can find a night
week after,
I'd rather just have one more meeting to discuss the plan, let Emily go ahead and make their edits, and then kick it over to the planning commission. Then we'll have to discuss, how we handle any kind of public meetings until we outreach.
So why don't you come out with a date for next week, Steve?
Yeah, I'll take a peek at my calendar. I had a bunch of different, Zoom meetings already set up.
We have planning commission on the 12th.
Yep, and zoning is Monday night.
I have a meeting on the 13th. I'm just checking my calendar. I've got a meeting on the 13th, which is Wednesday.
Is zoning still Monday? Why did I think it's tomorrow?
No. Zoning is typically tomorrow, but you got bumped because of the Planning Committee of Common Council.
Oh, so I deleted the wrong one.
And
Okay.
Steve, I'm gonna shut the live stream off since we're just figuring out dates at this point.
Okay. Yeah,